Hello everyone and welcome to our final session of the Impact Festival 2020. This week has been themed Growing a Person-Centred Ecosystem of Services. Over the past 5 weeks, we've tried to create a space where we can meet, explore ideas, learn new skills and build a shared sense of what we want to achieve going forward. The theme throughout has been accelerating impact, which has been particularly pressing given the huge changes that have been made in response to the pandemic. My name is Hannah Green. I'm the Lived Experiences Specialist here at the Centre for Homelessness Impact, and today I'm joined again by an absolutely brilliant panel for part 2 of learning about what works by reflecting on what doesn't. So we're reconvening to reflect on the festival and to explore what we can do to ensure we're learning from people's experiences of homelessness in order for us to move towards an end to homelessness. So before we get started, we welcome your questions and comments. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat box to the other attendees. For any questions that come up as the session goes on, we'll try and answer them towards the end. And please do get involved on Twitter. The hashtag is CHIFest2020. So without further ado, I'd like to pass over to the panelists who are going to introduce themselves and say a little bit about their experiences and what they do now. So Vicky, we'll come to you first.
Hi there, thanks Hannah. Yes, so my name's Vicky and I work for Cyrenians currently as project manager for the Randolph Crescent Cohorting Centre that was set up in a response to COVID to provide emergency accommodation for those with symptoms of COVID or who had a positive COVID test. Because we had so few referrals for that service, we've now, in addition, opened up as an out of hours accommodation, so the council are referring people on an overnight basis to us. And I'm also the project coordinator for the Scottish Government's pilot hotel to private rented sector scheme. So we're trying to get people who have been or currently are staying in the homeless emergency hotels into private rented accommodation. I'm a trustee for Crisis as well, and I'm a change lead on the All In for Change team. And I've also got a lot of lived experience of homelessness, staying in B&Bs and sofa surfing and in the supported hostels.
Thanks, Vicky. Gabriel, I'm going to come to you next, if that's okay, please.
Hi everyone, I'm Gabriel Imevere. I'm the youngest board member in history for YMCA Birmingham, the youngest in 170 years. Also had lived experience through emergency accommodation and supported accommodation. As well as that, I'm an entrepreneur and author.
And Stan, finally, can you introduce yourself, please, and tell us a little bit about your experiences? I think you're on mute, Stan.
Is that better? Can you hear me, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I've got computer outage. I'm trying to sort that as well. Hi, I'm Stan Burridge. I'm Director of Expert Focus. I've got lived experience starting from the time I was a runaway from a kid in care. I used to lead Pathways Expert by Experience program, and now continue to run involvement stuff. Yeah, that's me.
Thank you. So as most of you know, I myself was homeless until earlier this year. So for me, the whole festival has just been absolutely incredible to see so many different people come together to really achieve something fantastic. So what I'd like each of you to do is to give us your personal highlight of the festival and maybe tell us a bit about that event or moment and why it's stuck with you. Vicky, we'll come to you first again, please.
Thank you. I mean, there's just been so much. It's been such a variety of webinars. It's hard to pick one. I did chair a session yesterday for the All In for Change team, but I'm biased about that one, so I probably can't pick that. A couple of highlights. There was one on pivoting policy to adapt to COVID-19, which had John Sparks, the CEO of Crisis, and Paul Atherton, who has current experience of homelessness. So I thought that was a really great one. And Towards Homelessness as a UN Sustainable Development Goal, which I thought was really interesting because it was looking at homelessness on a global level rather than sort of national or UK based. And the women's homelessness session as well, I thought was great, but I could go on.
Gabriel, what about you? What have been some of your highlights?
So for me, philanthropy and social entrepreneurship, they intrigue me, possibly because I'm from an entrepreneurialism background, and just thinking about, moving forward in the future with myself and how I grow, I would like to think about how I could give back in that way. So, listening to that particular, conversation was enlightening for me, because it's definitely something that I could see myself doing further down the line. But, seconding what Vicky was saying, the festival has such a variety. I'm very interested in the data as well. So, figuring out a bit more about the data, so how we can integrate that as well. So there's so much to say, how many, conversations you've had over the whole festival. It's hard to really pick and say which is my favorite, but if I'm being a bit biased, I'm looking at an entrepreneurialism background, and that would intrigue me the most, because I kind of see myself going in that direction. So yeah, I'd say that.
Stan, what about you? What's been your highlight of the festival?
Oh mate, there are so many actually. I think I've looked at it from a different perspective. I've come in kind of thinking that I'm going to hear lots of things that I need to question, how they come to that information, what kind of stuff is being delivered. And I've found really that I've been surprised by how plain and clear all the messages are. I think that, I've kind of written some stuff up that maybe I'll get a chance to go through later, but I've kind of been pleasantly surprised by the brutal honesty, the lack of competition that there seems to have been, in the fact that nobody seems to be competing to do the one-upmanship, which I often find happens. I think there's been some really honest and brutal appraisals of what's going on. Well, the whole thing really, and I think this, and full credit to Ligia, the team, this panel of lived experience has just been amazing. And I think that to run something for a couple of days is one thing, but to put together 5 weeks of really interesting content has been brilliant. And to watch you grow as a chair as well through that time, Hannah, I think you're truly amazing, and I'm sure everyone will agree with me on that.
Thank you, Stan. So my personal highlight, as I mentioned briefly, has been seeing so many different people come together, from government ministers and frontline workers and academics and experts by experience, all with that shared sense of what we want to achieve, which I just think has been brilliant. And something we've mentioned a few times throughout the festival is the kind of notion of, social distancing, but it's not social distancing, it's physical distancing. And I think we've all felt kind of really connected during the 5 weeks. And the other thing as well, obviously we all know that we want to end homelessness, that's the end goal, but we know that that's not going to happen tomorrow. So it's really, highlighted for me and maybe for other people that the practical steps that we can take in terms of creating and utilizing rigorous evidence and data, and linking that with lived experiences. So Gabriel, I'm going to come to you first this time. What have you learned from the festival, and what do you maybe think other people watching have learned as well?
I think one thing that we can all on the festival, how we can all come together to achieve a common goal. And I think, that stands out so much to me, seeing how the center have been able to draw all these experts together into one place, to talk about. I think what people should really do is start to look at that from outside, and start to think, wow, we've been able to do this, and we've all been able to come together, dedicate some time to look at a bigger goal, to look at a bigger vision. Now, how can we come together to start implementing that action? That's how I've looked at it. And I've actually thought the togetherness it's amazing. So what I've learned is that we can actually unite once we have a common goal, a bit of organization, leadership, all those things in place. And now it's like, how can we now take all the information that we've got, we've put together in this festival, and all the experts, stay in touch and begin to make that change. I think that's one thing that I've learned. It's definitely opened my mind and my eyes to how well people can collaborate.
Thank you for that. And Vicky, what about you? What's been your key learning point?
I mean, I think just echoing what yourself and Gabriel have said, I think what really stood out to me was having, when you've got panelists on a webinar, everyone's sort of equal and all the experience is equal. It's not hierarchical. So you've got CEOs and you've got government ministers sitting with people of current or previous lived experience. And I think that's a really good message to be putting out. I also think because homelessness is such a vast and kind of multidisciplinary issue, it's easy to get fixated on your direct area, so whether that's demographically or geographically. So I would usually be thinking about what's happening in Edinburgh and what's happening with the people who I'm working with, and I'm not thinking about further afield as much, and well, what's happening in London and how are they dealing with it, and what can we learn from them, and what's happening in Wales and how can we learn from them. So I think it's been great to sort of have all of the information brought to you with the people who are delivering the information. So you're not just reading papers or reading emails or reading websites, you're getting to connect with the person who's delivering the message. And I think it just brings it to life a lot more.
And Stan, how about you? You're on mute again, Stan.
So you don't hear me coughing. Sorry, I'm slowly getting my computer working, so we'll be ready live soon. I've learnt lots, absolute lots, and I think that, I want to kind of echo a little bit about what Vicky said, that you've got lots of people with lots of different skills all in the same space and sharing lots of ideas and talking about experiences in a really open way. And I think that most of the stuff that I've learned has kind of reflected and challenged some of my former beliefs, because I've been around the system for a long time. I was a runaway in the 70s. I think it was probably the late 70s was when I probably first hit or first slept out under the stars, was probably, as a runaway that long for time. And I've been around in and out of it in various forms for a considerable amount of time. And I've always found that the system is not geared up to challenging itself or being challenged. And there are lots of criticisms that I've got about that. And I think that what I've listened to, the stuff I've listened to is through these events, is the system is clearly saying that they're getting things wrong and that they want to address those things and to look for ideas, to share those ideas, rather than to play the "this is mine" scenario where they hold on to it. One of the lines, I was penning something which I'm happy to share at some point. And I basically thought to myself, what is the system like? How does it behave around homeless people? And this may sound really crass, but I can only enlighten it to being very similar to a drug dealer. A drug dealer gets hold of the client and wants to hold the client close, doesn't want the client to go anywhere. And I think the system does very much the same with homeless people, wants to hold them close to its organisation and doesn't want it to go and doesn't want to go anywhere, almost as a way of justifying themselves. And I've seen through these 5 weeks that there's challenges to that without addressing that concept, but there are challenges to that, and challenges I really think are impressive.
That's great, Stan. It's great to hear them positive reflections as well. And one of my key reflections has been the interplay between lived experience, obviously, as we've spoken about, and the evidence and data. And we know that we can't end homelessness without the evidence and data, but we also can't end it without listening to the people who have lived it, which I think, we've made a good start at that, and we really need to capitalize on that. So I'll be interested to know from you guys how we can build on what we've learned over the past 5 weeks, and how you see us moving forwards with what we've learned, to utilise the lived experience and the evidence and the data, and just so we can continue to make sure that those voices are heard. Gabriel, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I don't mind going first. I think that, ultimately moving forward now, it's about harnessing the momentum off the back of the festival. Right now, everyone's attention, everyone's eyes has been on the festival. It's very important now, we're transitioning out of the festival and now we're in the final stages of the festival, that, we do get a time to rest and say we've appreciated what's going on. But now it's also the time to, what can we do immediately after the festival is done to keep people's attention, to keep the momentum going, because we have to make sure that that momentum doesn't slow down. The festival has been so amazing and so important for the culture. The important thing to do now is to be able to carry that momentum and start implementing some of the actions that we've taken away from all of these positive conversations and discussions. So I would say, how can we get and create a mindset of thinking, we've got this momentum now, let's see how we can use that to start implementing what we've learned and collected from the festival.
Vicky, I'm going to come to you next.
I mean, the festival's shown us there's undoubtedly a lot of desire and a lot of passionate people that really want to see change and are dedicated and determined to seeing the change, even up to government ministers, and I think it's great that people with the lived experience and the data and the people who are making decisions have been brought together. And we spoke a bit about this yesterday. They've been brought together in conversation, because it's really easy to get into a us against them mentality, which doesn't help anybody at the end of the day. Everybody's working with constraints, so it's about seeing what is possible and moving forward. I think it's a key time for us trying to make some sort of an end towards homelessness, while there's so much attention, media attention and public attention because of COVID. I think it would be such a shame and a waste to not use that and push forward with it. I don't know the best way of doing that. I mean, I think dialogue's always important, and just keep bringing the messages, taking the messages to the decision makers, making sure that what we've spoke about, so the data, the lived experience and the decision makers are joined together to try and facilitate improvements towards ending homelessness. But yeah, it's not an easy task. So
Definitely not. I don't know if Stan can hear us.
I can hear you. Can you hear me? Because my camera's gone, but I think I might have audio.
Yeah, we can hear you, Stan. So what's how do you think we can build on this and move towards an end to homelessness?
Well, I think really, I think the messages and the way those messages are conveyed, I think is really important. I'll give you a little scenario. I'm working with somebody at the moment where they are prime candidate for a Housing First. The local authority have declined them access to Housing First, suggesting that they need to deal with their own addiction issues first, which isn't Housing First. Housing First is accommodation, deal with the rest of it afterwards. So I think the way forward is that, to be honest, there almost needs to be an idiot guide. This is a firm structure of how things are done. There's no flexibility to make up your own mind on how you interpret things. This is the formula. There has to be a little bit of flexibility if that's going to prove positive, but if it's negative, as in that case, then that needs to be taken away. That option has to be taken away, because I think it's the same with when you're reading anything. We all read things differently. We read the same piece of paper, but all have a better or different understanding of that. And I think the way messages go forward from here, it needs to take away the grey area.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying there, Stan. So now I'm gonna focus on a few specific sessions that I know you've all tuned into. So Vicky, I'm going to come to you first. In the women's homelessness session, we heard pretty honest accounts of kind of the failings of the criminal justice system when dealing with female offenders, and kind of the intersectionality of domestic abuse, homelessness, offending behaviours and addiction, and kind of the need for more joined up thinking and trauma-informed approaches. So I'm just very interested really to hear your thoughts and reflections on that session.
Yeah, I mean, I think I sort of related a lot to that session, and I think what they were saying within that is certainly in women's prisons, a lot of the women in there really shouldn't be there. They've been criminalized for things that really could be dealt with in another way, you know. So a lot of the time it could be it's a lot of petty crimes, you know, thefts largely around drug habits, or because of a controlling or coercive partner. There's so many women who are obvious and recent self-harmers in the prisons, and then they're having to deal with, because there's a larger majority of women who are the primary caregivers, so they're having to deal with getting out of custody and not having access to their children. And they were saying that of all the sort of early releases from custody due to COVID, there was such a high percentage of women who had been rejected for this just because they didn't have any accommodation. And now the cost for keeping the women, or men even, in the prisons rather than paying for some sort of home for them to be released into, the cost on the criminal justice system is far greater than providing accommodation, even if it was private rented sector accommodation. But because there isn't so much joined up in terms of budgeting and how different departments allocated funding, the criminal justice, if there's a saving there, say the drug service, so like say if the drug services or the local authority is making some sort of saving, it's coming out of another department's budget, you know. So it needs to be more streamlined, so it makes sense. So it should be looked at as a whole, rather than, well, it's going to cost us money, so why would we do that to save another team money? So it needs to be a more joined up approach. Also, they were talking about the pilot that was enabling women in domestic abuse situations to remain in their own home, and the abusive partner was forced to move out, but that had lost funding, so it's no longer a thing. And yeah, it's sad, and it was really great listening to the webinar. There was a lady there with lived experience of sex work, and she was really interesting to listen to. And it actually made me think about stigmatization, and that even within homelessness and people living in the sort of homeless community are still further stigmatized. So sex workers are often further stigmatized than people who are currently homeless. So it gave a lot of food for thought.
Yeah, I think it made it quite clear to me that we need like a gendered approach to homelessness, because we know that the experiences of women and men that are homeless are so different, and are often for different reasons. So that made that quite clear to me. Stan and Gabriel, I'm going to come to you next. The sessions we did on the media, the journalism session, and the session that Stan, you were a part of with Crisis, on the way we talk about homelessness, I'd be very interested to hear both of your thoughts on them and what you think we should be taking from them.
Gabriel, go first, Gabriel.
Yeah, as you all know my stance when it comes to the media, journalists, and the narratives that we're putting out towards the media. And I think ultimately, my point still remains the same. We can have those conversations, but we need to start getting into a place where we almost feel responsible, for what we put out. And I think when we get into that place where we say, I'm going to write about a certain specific topic, I think it's very important that we get to a place where we're saying we're responsible for the messages that are being put out. I think when we get into that position and that place, and we do start to take that accountability, I think we'll start to say, wow, these messages that I'm putting out, are they helping these individuals? What is the return on that, let's say return on help, ROH, what's the return on help of what I'm writing right now? How will that, shape somebody's mind who is going to read this, who may not be going through homelessness, who may be going through homelessness? I think it's very important that we get to that place where we're starting to say, okay, I'm going to take responsibility for what I'm writing. I've been given this task to talk about this. How do I personally feel about it, and removing your personal feelings from it because it's maybe a job to do to write about something. I think we owe it to the people going through these crises to start thinking about, being responsible for the narratives that we're putting out, and actually thinking about how those narratives can actually aid people that are going through these situations, or even make their situations much worse.
Stan, I'm gonna come to you next.
Yes. I spoke to Crisis, and also about how those messages come out. I think that it's quite difficult to explain the problems that there are. I think that lots of people are given the impression that people have a voice, people are allowed to express that voice and help shape their own destiny almost. And quite often that's not correct. That the voice is almost suppressed by the way the system is designed. So I think that the media in itself plays into that by only wanting the crass headlines. One of the things that always really annoys me is if there's an offence, quite a serious offence printed in a newspaper, it will often say of no fixed abode, which gives the impression that that homeless person, a homeless person, is responsible for that particular crime. And I think that the way messages come out actually feed into that. It feeds into the fact that, instead of homeless people being a victim of circumstance, victim of economics, breakdown, mental health addictions, they are the perpetrator of their own destiny. And it's difficult for me to know where to hook in to sort of say this bit needs to be pulled out and replaced with this, because there are so many things that are fractured within that, within how messages are conveyed. There are so many things which need to change. One of the things that really kind of irks me a little bit is, as I mentioned, I've been through the system for a long time, in and out professionally and living in the system. And some of the stuff that's coming about now has already been done. It was already mentioned, it was already talked about. If we talk about healthcare for homeless people, back in the 90s, a group of us got together and we produced an alternative manifesto which looked at access to healthcare services and improving those healthcare services. Where did that end up? It ended up with a petition at Downing Street, and it was collected by the Big Issue, and we thought it was quite an impressive campaign. What happened with those voices? Silenced. Nothing ever came of it. If you look further on, we looked at the numbers of homeless people who were dying in London. We basically got Trafalgar Square closed off, released 600 and something balloons, black balloons into the sky, a real symbolic gesture towards a number of homeless people who were dying as a result of being homeless. What happened to those voices? Nothing. And then along will come an academic or somebody, a professional, 15, 20, 25 years later, and they will make a statement, and then people will listen. And I think we need to change the way we listen to people. I mean, I wrote this thing, I'm trying to dig this because although it's not the most clever thing that I've written, but if you can imagine falling over in the street and what it's like for a homeless person, if you fall over in the street and you hurt your leg, the ambulance will come along and convey you to hospital. And throughout your journey to that hospital, my leg, you get to the hospital and the doctor won't talk to you. The doctor will talk to the paramedic, and the doctor will say, this person's got a broken leg. And then the doctor will take note of your leg. They won't listen to you. It's your leg, your pain, your understanding of it. But until professional tells that doctor that's what the problem is, the doctor almost takes no notice. And the crass element to that is, if that paramedic says it's his hand or her hand, that's where the doctor will focus, regardless. So the leg and the injury will be ignored because that's not where a professional says that the focus should be. And I think that's what we need to change. We need to start listening to people who've been there, who are there now. They're the important people, because these are the people whose lives that we want to change and improve and help them to improve for themselves. So it's all those things all pulled together, the messages that the people we listen to, the message we send out. I think all of that needs a complete remix. And as I go back to what I said about this whole 5 weeks, it's been about people being brutally honest with how the system is and the understanding that things need to be changed. So I think that it can start here. The catalyst for how we deliver the voices and the changes to where we listen to them can start here. And I think that all of us, that kind of have some investment in making a change and making a difference. I like to write these wonderful little quotes. Some people think I should be taking medication, but I still like them anyway. And I think that we need to, what do we want to achieve? And my quote is, don't be satisfied carving your name in a tree when you can be responsible for helping to plant a new forest. And I think that's where we should be, planting the new forest.
Thank you, Stan. You've I don't really have anything to add to that. You've summed it up perfectly. And I think something else from that session that I found really interesting, Michael Buchanan from the BBC, he mentioned about charities often acting as gatekeepers and kind of almost preventing journalists from speaking to clients or service users or people that are experiencing homelessness. And the charities have the best intentions, obviously protecting the people they work with. But if they continue to do that, how are the media going to push these positive narratives that we keep talking about? And I think sometimes, obviously, it's about a headline. But I think the media really need to, and I know Gabriel will agree with me on this one, that they need to be focusing on, our experiences of homelessness don't define us, but what we do with those experiences does. I know me and Gabriel have spoken before about the fact that homelessness made us more resilient. So it's about the things that homelessness has taught us, as opposed to the homelessness. So I think that, charities have the best intentions, but, how do we get them to move away, Gabriel, from that kind of almost overcautiousness?
I think to have charities move away from that overcautiousness, I think you do need leadership. You do need someone in a position to say, let's at least have that dialogue. Ultimately, charities are going to have to take the risk. We're going to have to take the risk with the media. We're going to have to trust the media because they're the one who are going to be writing those stories. But at the same time, I think it's very important that as we begin to open those doors, we also begin to really focus on the relationship that we build with the media at the same time to open those doors. I think the best way for us to move through this process is to open the doors anyway, and then begin to build on the dialogue and begin to build on the relationship. As you know, the media may sometimes have their own agendas, which is why charities close doors about things. But if we are positive about moving forward, I think we definitely need to start beginning to really cultivate our relationships with media and also understand and ask the question, what do you want from us? What do you really want from us? Because I think when we start asking those questions before we even get through to having stories even come out into the media, I think it will start to create a new dialogue that may not really be happening. I think we ultimately, though, we need to begin to take the risk to open our doors and start to have dialogue with certain people that are in certain positions. I think from that place there, we'll be able to actually cultivate a new mindset within the media and cultivate a new mindset within our charities that are afraid to really talk to the media at the moment.
So at this point, if anyone has any questions for any of the panelists, please do put them in the Q&A box and we'll answer them. Vicky, I'm going to come back to you now. The session with Kevin Stewart on the view from Scottish Government, I personally loved how, I guess, keen he was to include the voices of lived experience, along with obviously the most recent evidence and data. So, you know, what are your feelings on that session?
Yeah, so the Scottish Government, as I say, I'm part of the All In for Change team who were doing the session yesterday. So it's a group of, I did speak about this last time, but maybe not everyone was there. It's a group made up of half people with lived experience and half those with frontline experience, as well as academics. And we've been brought together to kind of feed into the Scottish Government's Homeless Prevention and Strategy group. So, I mean, I think more recently, with the advent of COVID, there's been really clear links to the information that we are given, how it's being acted upon, because it's been easier to facilitate us going in and taking part in the sort of high level decision making meetings, because we're just popping in via Zoom rather than, I suppose it can be more challenging if people are coming, say, from Aberdeen for a meeting for an hour or two. It's a lot easier just to kind of pop on the computer, if you have one, to take part. And because there's been such a rushed and rapid response to deal with COVID, the government have come to us directly with specific questions and received specific feedback from us. So to the, as I say, the Homeless Prevention and Strategy group and the main HARSAG group, which is also a Scottish Government Homelessness and Rough Sleep in Action group. And so we've had crossover meetings with them as well. So I think that's been crucial in allowing, because too often, if people with lived experience are sort of consulted or asked for their feedback, it's never clear what's actually going to happen to that. And once you've sat in sort of focus groups and you've spent half days reporting back and describing your feelings and going through trauma and see no impact to what you've done, eventually you do disengage and think, oh, another consultation, why would I waste my time? Because I'm going to get a free cup of coffee and maybe a sandwich. You know, why do I want to waste half a day doing that? So I think the Scottish Government, I feel, have really stepped up in that regard and actively listened, and more importantly than just listening, they've taken what we've said on board, and we've seen that in their sort of minutes and in their policies, you know, in their new policies. So I think, yeah, it's been a really positive experience, and you do genuinely feel listened to by those who are in the positions of making the decisions that affect people with experience of homelessness or people currently in homelessness. So I think it's been a really positive experience, and we've had a lot of positive feedback from the change team about that. So yeah. And so Kevin Stewart himself in the webinar really spoke about the importance of lived experience as well, which I thought was good. He really sort of highlighted that and highlighted the impact of the change team. So I don't feel like it is just tokenistic. I really get a sense that it's genuine and what we're doing counts.
And Gabriel, I know last year you interviewed the MP Heather Wheeler, so I'm keen to hear your thoughts on this year's session, especially I guess the Westminster session, but maybe some comments on the other ones as well.
Yeah, it's great to know again that, you know, the government are taking affirmative action in getting involved and not shying away from this discussion. I think really what I would like to see now, as I said, beforehand about momentum. I want to see the momentum after this. You know, I love the fact that conversations happen. I love the fact we get to question the MPs. I love the fact that the MPs have their solutions that they bring to the table in the conversations. My focus now is on the momentum. I want to see, you know, if we can even get to a point where we've even got action points that are given to us. If we could get that, that would be amazing. But I want to see the action. I want to see what is happening in government. You've come along, you've had the conversations with us, you've had the questions. What's the action now? Where's the momentum going? I don't want to see this fading off into the background at all. I want to see it firsthand. You know, you're responsible. You're in a position of power. We want to work with you. We want to end homelessness. Let's see what you're putting in place. Be transparent with us. You know, that's what we want. We want transparency. So until we get that point, complete transparency, you know, I don't really want to have to be talking about the conversations that we've had in the past now. We've got the momentum. Let's see the transparency. Let's see the actions in a transparent place. And I think then the government will start to actually get confidence from the people. You know, they'll actually start to be like, people will start to say, wow, they're listening to us. We'll actually be in a position to say the change that we want is being made. And you know what? It's not being hidden from us. It's not being swept to the side, or, you know, it's not being sidelined. We've got clear action points of what's happening. We've got deadlines. Do you know what I mean? I want to see the clarity. So that's where my point comes in now.
And Stan, what about you?
Yeah, I'm just going to agree with Gabriel. I think that you need some clarity. One of the things that work with involvement is almost a kind of, you said, we did. It's a kind of diary of what's been said and what's been done about it. And it works both small scale and large scale. And I think if you want bullet points created from that, this is what is being said. What are your responses? And then feed the responses in so you complete your diary. So I'm kind of, yeah, I'm going to park it there because I think Gabriel said it all.
Perfect. We've got a question from Andrew. So we've talked about the value of the festival having researchers and people with lived experience as part of the same exercise. How do we integrate those perspectives in determining what works and how to implement it, as opposed to just having the two I've lost my words completely, guys. Perspectives side by side. Vicky's recent experience in Scotland sounds encouraging. Vicky, we'll come to you first. How do we get them working as one as opposed to side by side?
Yeah, I mean, I think having forums, you know, like the Change Team, it's a forum, everybody's in together. And Beth, who is part of iSphere, which is the Heriot-Watt University, they do a lot of research into homelessness and have helped Crisis produce the homelessness monitors in recent years. Beth had been doing sort of sessions on what the evidence says, and then we kind of have a discussion on how that matches up with what the lived experience is. And a lot of the time, the two complement each other. So the research is saying this, that these are the barriers people are facing, that these are the bad experiences or the good experience that people are having. So this is what works. And then people who have been through it or are working in the sector, more often than not, they do match up, you know. So it's a bit like the Centre for Homelessness Impact. So the data more times than not will match up with the experience on the ground and the lived experience. So I think the two together make a really strong case. But as you say, it's about not having the two side by side, but having a space where the two can join together. And I think that then has a bigger impact, you know, the evidence as well as the lived experience. So you've got the hard data, the qualitative and the quantitative together. It makes a much stronger case, I think, and it's a lot harder to disagree with, because sometimes lived experience can be, oh well, that's just one person's experience, or, you know, it's just the people that you asked that said that. But when you've got the hard facts and statistics, it's more difficult to argue with.
Stan, what are your thoughts?
I think that trust. I think to integrate the two things so they run parallel to each other, there has to be trust. And for trust to build, there has to be some level of accountability. Very often I see systems who are very closed off to being criticised. They feel it's almost like an attack on them, when it should be viewed as a way of shaping and developing the service to fit the need. I mean, let's not forget the vast majority of building-based services, we're talking about hostels and stuff, have their feet planted very firmly in the 17th and 18th century. It's got no place in modern society. But if you try to change that, it almost feels like it's an attack. So in order to change that, you need to be open to dialogue and honest dialogue. And then you begin to build the trust up, and then things begin to change. And going back to what Gabriel said, and of course, you know, having the bullet points, having that sort of like, these are the bullet points, what's happening, where's the action? So you build the trust up and say, well, during this conversation, this is what you said, and this is how we're responding to that. And I think as that begins to blossom, as that begins to grow, changes will occur, and the dialogue gets much deeper, and then you start to finding out more. Because I think that very often the involvement, the voice of people with lived experience can be viewed as just being tokenistic. It can be, let's trundle out someone, we'll get them to tell their story, we'll put out an onion, everyone have a little sob, that's it, all job done, we've now fulfilled our criteria. This is what we've done, we have listened. And it's not just about listening, it's about action. As Gabriel said, it's about action. So it's building up the trust so people feel confident enough to tell you what the real problems are, what the real issues are, and then responding to that. And then you'll be able to integrate them to get their work together. They'll work as a unit rather than something that runs in parallel.
Gabriel, I'm going to ask for your thoughts on that question as well, please.
Yeah, thanks for question as well. It's an amazing question. I think what we need to do is be willing to invest. If we want to, create this space for integration, we've got to say, okay, to create that space for integration, we're going to need to invest. What are we going to have to invest for young people to be able to meet up with people that have the data and the time and, all this experience? What are we going to have to invest to have people who have lived experience to be able to come and get into these spaces and integrate, because as Stan was saying, yes, we are going to have that dialogue, but what are we going to have to invest into creating a space where that dialogue can happen? Because let's not forget, this is something that has not integrate. We're going to have to invest into creating a team, invest into creating a culture that allows the two to integrate. And I think what really needs to happen is, a leader needs to step into the position to say, I'm willing to invest whatever it takes to be able to cultivate this culture, to be able to cultivate this new mindset of integrating the two. And I think, we have to be confident in knowing that we're willing to invest whatever it takes to end homelessness and to bring these two into a space of integration.
Can I just add on to that? Do you mind if I just sort of throw some stuff in here? It's just, let's not forget the backdrop to this festival, right, has been sadly, and rather unintentionally, the impact on COVID-19 on the homelessness community. And I think what it demonstrated was that when organisations put aside the competition that they have, the one-upmanship which exists, and the absurdity of criticising each other, and they actually work towards a common goal, you were able to move 15,000 people from the street into safe accommodation. And that was no mean feat. Professor Aidan Halligan once said that no humanitarian, no moral, no spiritual argument would ever be enough to influence the powers that be unless it was wedded to a robust and rigorous economic framework. This has proven very clearly that that's no longer the case. There was a humanitarian, a moral and a spiritual argument, and it made it happen. And the key to getting all that was over the line was the avoidance of the competition. It's where everybody joined forces and pushed it over the line. So it had all those wonderful things, but nobody thought about the money. Nobody thought about how much it will cost. They did it because it was the right thing to do. So do we need to look at stuff and say, well, this is how it's funding, this is how much money we need to spend? Or do we need to push the argument that we need to do this because it's the right thing to do?
Completely agree with you there, Stan. So we've got a few questions that have come in. So is there any work that you're all doing outside of the festival to use your experience and your lived experience to work towards an end to homelessness? And obviously, Vicky, your job changed quite a lot quite quickly due to COVID. So what's next for you?
Well, so as I said at the beginning, I'm doing the sort of 2 jobs at the moment, part-time, but after the next week, when the funding ends for the COVID, the cohorting centre, then I'll be doing the hotel to private rented sector role solely. So we're really working against the clock to try and get people assessed, check sort of benefits, because not everybody in the hotels, because there's no need to have housing benefit paying for the hotels, not everybody's on benefits or has had any sort of housing assessment. So we're really racing against the clock to try and move people on before they've got nowhere to sleep that night. So yeah, that's going to be my main focus over the next few months, and then hopefully moving further afield to people who are in temp that maybe have a 2-year wait to be housed in Edinburgh, so that the private rented sector is an option. And it isn't the answer for everyone. There's a lot of negatives as well as positives to it, but it is an option for people who don't want to stay in temporary accommodation and want to move into a more settled home. So yeah, that's going to keep me busy for a while, I think.
Gabriel, what about you? What's next? What have you got in the pipeline?
So I've obviously got my board member duties at YMCA, and I think they're really important. Also showing that you can go from a position of being a resident and being able to get to, you know, the top of an organization and be able to shape that narrative and be involved in making sure that that organization is doing what it's supposed to do for the people that actually go through it. So those roles I'll still be taking on. But what I really want to look towards doing in the future, once I've got some personal entrepreneurial stuff out of the way, is look at something that I did with a company like National Grid. So I an internship, at National Grid. They came into YMCA Birmingham and they have a program called Grid for Good. Now, Grid for Good is such an amazing program because it allowed someone like me who was going through the homelessness situation to be able to get some money into my pocket. So organization like National Grid, and on top of that, get experience in working in the global brand and digital team. Now, it wasn't just me that was able to go through the Grid for Good system, but what I would like to do is see more organizations like National Grid have schemes, take actionable steps to, you know, taking someone who's going through that certain position and putting them in a position to you know, have social mobility, because that is so important. You know, so what I'd really like to do is see if I can have more discussions with organizations like National Grid that have programs like Grid for Good, and see how we can, you know, incorporate more social mobility.
Stan, what's next for you? You're on mute, Stan.
There you go. Is that better? Great. I'm in the final stages of getting a contract to support lived experience into a university research project, and bearing in mind that we're, you know, with the COVID thing going on at the moment, that also means equipping them with tablets and smartphones, so that everybody's able to take part in this using technology. Obviously, of course, you know, my whole thing is about trying to open doors and keep them open for people with lived experience to be heard. So I'm going to keep challenging the way that organizations do that, because I think, sadly, I always use this analogy that if I moved into your house and I'm eating your food and watching your telly and sleeping on your sofa, I can't tell you you're the worst cook I've ever met, because bang, the sofa's gone. Your dog's getting fat, I'm getting grey, and I'm out the door. So I think that we need to look at how that's done. So, and that all boils down to being accountable, and it down to being honest, and also not to see that every complaint or everything that's said about how the system is wrong, to see that as an attack. It should be seen as, this is the way we can move forward. This is the way we can develop. So that's a big task. It's a big ask, and I'm doing it with very little money. So if anyone wants to throw a contract at me, I'll have some of that. But that's kind of where I'm at, really.
Perfect. And we're running out of time. So can I just have one thing off each of you, just your key take-home message from the past 5 weeks?
Will I start?
Go for it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've already spoken about it. It's you know, the lived experience being having a seat at the table kind of thing, and the importance of the lived experience, but also the passion and that most of the speakers have shown when they've been talking about ending homelessness. I think it's been really inspiring, and it makes you optimistic, I think, for the future.
Stan?
I think, moving forward, it is a case of just start talking and listening to those voices. And remember that co-production means all and not some. So I think everyone should be working towards bringing in people who are not necessarily going to be the first to be heard. They're not necessarily going to be the easiest people to work with close up, but accept those challenges, because there isn't anybody I've ever worked with lived experience who've not had challenges, and I'm probably the most challenging that you will come across. I'm a bit of a, I'll try not to swear here, but I'm a bit of a hooker, right? Because I kind of just question everything. I've never grown up out of the petulance that I think is kind of warranted sometimes. So it is a case of just listen to everyone. So that means looking at how you do that. It means opening yourself up to some criticism, because that criticism means change. And if you start to move those changes, it means you're making a difference. So, I will just go back and I'll just sort of repeat the quote that I left earlier, is don't be satisfied carving your name in a tree when you can be responsible for helping to plant a whole new forest.
Gabriel, I'm sure that's hard to follow. Just one quick thing from you.
It's a lot to follow, yes, Dan. You and Vicky, you both have contributed so much to the conversation, as well as you, Hannah, chairing it also. For me to follow you guys, it's a lot. But I would just say momentum, and keep that in the back of your mind moving forward from this. Momentum.
Thank you, guys. Gabriel, Stan and Vicky, for joining us for another fantastic session. I'm sure we'll be working again with you very soon. I can't quite believe how fast the last 5 weeks have flown by, and we've learned so much from all of our speakers and from everyone who's attended as well. So before we hand over to Dr. Ligia Teixeira, I want to share with you a short video which really celebrates the value of the voice of experience, which has been one of our core themes throughout the festival. You might see some familiar faces. Huge shout out to Natalie for her work on this. So yeah.
So we know we have good qualitative evidence that actually works, and certainly not listening to people is essentially the worst thing you can possibly do.
For me, the people that have made the most difference are the people that have actually cared about me as an individual and not kind of put me in a box.
People that really listen to what you're saying and can understand what your priorities are and can support you and empower you to achieve them, rather than A, doing everything for you themselves, or B, not giving you any support or assistance in trying to achieve your goals.
Have faith in that individual though. Start from a place of believing that that person can do it.
We can't end homelessness unless we address racial equity, the racialized history of our world.
Until you have more visible representations of people of colour at the top table being part of decision making, you have policy that is driven by people who actually haven't got that life experience.
Myth-busting, just telling people they're wrong, is never going to work in changing people's perceptions, because it misdiagnoses part of the issue, that this is an emotional reaction. This is not about rational consideration of the facts.
With your response, and you're designed around, we only respond to crisis homelessness, you'll probably get a lot more crisis homelessness.
I think we need to recognise that the agency and will of homeless people is really important. Homeless people sacrifice a huge amount to change their lives, and how we support them in doing that, which is all any of us who are not homeless ever can do. I think that really matters.
I can't see how we can deal with the issue of health inequalities without dealing with the issues of security of housing.
We outsource our response to a system, and of course systems, they're not very human.
In the first week of sort of semi-lockdown, we started to unite in a way that we wouldn't do normally. You suddenly realise just how diverse a bunch of characters are there.
This pandemic, as much as the response has not been great, it has shown that when governments feel that it's important, that they can make these huge sweeping structural changes that could be imperative for society.
There was something really important, I think, about the way in which it reset some of those relationships and expectations, stripping away some of the stigma, I think, and reminding us all of our shared humanity and our shared risk.
I've been absolutely inspired by the collaboration and cooperation that's gone on across the piece. And for the first time, we've been able to work with local authority partners and government officials and homelessness charities as a single team. And it's been transformational. There's just no other way of describing it.
When you're homeless, you've got to kind of learn to deal with the unexpected. You just have to get on with it and make the best of bad situations. You don't always have options, and when you don't know where you're going to be sleeping from one night to the next, and there's nothing you can do about it, you kind of have to develop thick skin.
Focusing on the end as to how we become resilient is of course very important, but there is often a journey to being able to build our resilience through some capacity of healing.
So I just kept focusing on the good and not the bad. I was looking forward and not back. So now I'm just doing so much, and I really enjoy what I do.
Thank you, Hannah and panelists. You're just so incredibly inspiring. And I suppose I'd just like to start by reminding everyone of why we did this. We did this because, you know, it's a moment to help accelerate impact, to ensure that any gains are long-lasting. When we set out to deliver our first ever Impact Festival, we wanted to create the space to meet, explore ideas, learn skills, and to build a shared sense of what we were all to achieve in homelessness over these coming months and years. And I hope that we've achieved that. And certainly hearing you all speak, which is so incredibly powerful. Over 5 weeks, we've explored how public policies and programs affect homelessness, both directly and indirectly, the importance of good quality and secure housing, what it means for all of us to be in it together, the importance of connecting with people and places, and how services can work together to create an effective centered ecosystem of services. In short, all the factors that we know from the evidence are vital to preventing people from becoming homeless in the first place. So I just wanted to start by saying, on behalf of the whole team, big thanks. You are just incredible. And of course, a special thanks to our 159 speakers, including many with lived experiences. We've been overwhelmed by the time, energy, wisdom, shared by everyone over the past 25 days. I'm humbled by how many hundreds of people made the space to join us, rain or sun or everything else going on in people's personal and professional lives. And of course, we've had such a wide range of involvement, as already pointed out, from, of course, organizations working in and around homelessness, organizations and people who inspire us greatly in the UK and internationally, government and statutory agencies, again in the UK and elsewhere, and of course from great universities we work with and sister organizations in the What Works global community. Some of the highlights, and obviously our wonderful panelists have already mentioned some of them, but we started the festival with John Kay, someone who we essentially really admire, and reminded us of the dangers of being too linear when we're trying to strive for success and achievements, that sometimes stopping to really understand how social like homelessness might be tackled even better by taking a less direct approach. So he's one of the people who really influenced our thinking when we were creating the center, and now we hope that other people will essentially also gain from his insights. Then we also listened from Jeff Mulgan and Stephen Aldrich about how governments not just in the UK, but across the globe, are really striving to become even smarter. And certainly they reminded us of the value, again, of imagination, of really thinking outside the box when we're striving to aim even higher, and the role of data in evidence to help us make better decisions. I also love the session by Sir Michael Marmot. Obviously, his work is very well known, and no doubt, like all of us, he hopes even greater strides have been taken since his review was published 10 years ago now. But certainly the links between health and housing are very well established, and the panelists really help bring that point home very powerfully. And who can forget this session here? And if you haven't watched it, please do, on women and homelessness and the complex interrelationships between not just obviously women's issues, but also domestic violence, criminal justice, and fundamentally for me, intergenerational inequalities as well. So one of the many things that we hope will continue to talk about after the festival is over. And of course, week 3 started with Julia Unwin and the wonderful Andrew Hudson, who's our chair, and Mark Potts, to talk about the role of communities. And something that really stayed with me was not just the fact that systems are often not human, like Mark would tell us many, many times, but also the role, the many roles that we play in our own lives as volunteers, as professionals of different types. And the fact that no matter what you do in the system, you have the power to do something, and owning that power is one of the most important things we can do. Then we also really wanted to create a space to talk about well-being and resilience, and we had a fantastic panel here as well. So again, do watch it. We've heard from our network, and we're worried about this, that, you know, we're ending the beginning, if you like, of this pandemic, and people's you know, energy levels, resilience levels seem to be running low. So obviously we need to do all we can to be the best we can. So they were full of little tips and strategy on the things you could be doing. So do listen to that if you haven't already. We ended last week with, again, more incredible people talking about the work that we've been doing together on the What Works community, and we're very excited to be scaling the What Works community to even more local authorities. But these are leaders in the 3 authorities that helped us design this program. And now, being founding members, they are also helping us scale them. So very, important moment, I guess, around really bringing the movement that we're all involved in to the next level. And this week, many people commented on this session around innovation. Many of us, talk about it, but what does it actually mean? Does it mean different things if you're in a big organization versus a small one? Of course it does. So what does it actually involve to do something that leads to change that's positive and to drive things forward? Again, another session to draw from. So one of the things that really came across from these and many other sessions, and obviously this is something that we've talked about this afternoon already, is the things that have been possible despite and because of the pandemic, which is quite remarkable if you think about it, because obviously the situation wasn't easy anyway before the pandemic, as I'm sure you all remember. But obviously this is making a challenging situation even more challenging. And of course, as with most other things, the people who come from the pride backgrounds are most affected. And yet look at what we've achieved, it's really important to celebrate this. Not just governments at both local and national level, but wider sector. We've responded to the pandemic at speed. And over 16,000 individuals were relocated to hotels and other types of emergency accommodation. A raft of emergency measures were introduced to protect people who might be at risk. The efforts worked. It's worked. We know from the latest stats that long-term rough sleeping has gone down. We know that only 16 deaths are estimated to have happened in England and Wales. Is it an underestimate? Of course. And yet, certainly a lot lower than anyone thought possible when the estimates run to thousands. So really important to celebrate this, because it's a true achievement. But what now? What comes next? And certainly when everyone is exhausted, that's the reality. Jeff Mulgan very helpfully reminded us of the fact that one of the most interesting questions in the next period is whether the crisis shifts what we think is possible or conceivable or normal. So, for instance, in relation to homelessness, are we heading towards Finland or California? Obviously, in most respects, we hope that we are building our own way out of the crisis and a more effective response than any of those countries. But a really important question. And one of the things that really impressed us at the centre is how many cities, and not just cities, local areas, how they've been responding to this. They're coming certainly to us and asking us about what they need to do differently. They want ideas, they want to try different things. They really feel this is the opportunity to think outside the box. And we have instances of people coming to talk to us about redesigning emergency accommodation out of their local systems, which is quite unheard of, certainly in my decade in homelessness. But what we do know from the work we've done in the centre is that to achieve that change will require action and systematic action across these three strategic challenges. Number one, we need better data foundations. Poor quality data really weakens our ability to respond as promptly as we have to. Number two, the creation of a more extensive body of evidence that enhances any of it works. We just don't have everything we need currently, and in some ways we never will, but we certainly could do a lot better, and certainly in the UK context. And finally, strengthening the sector's capacity to act on robust insight. It's not easy to act on the evidence there is, so people need help, and it's about behavioural change as much as anything else. So taking each one of those challenges in turn, and I suppose our contribution to date, but of course these are just examples of things that we believe can and should be happening by everyone around. we were reminded by Andrea Coleman from Bloomberg that, this is all about, ensuring that we support people in local areas use data in decision-making and policy-making. But certainly what we found in the last few months is that, yes, there's a new appreciation for data, but the data there is often lacks the breadth and depth that is required. So we certainly have been doing a lot of work with our partners to understand what they need, to understand what can be done, not just to inform the work that's happening now, but also for the longer term. What changes can we do to systems to improve them and their responses? This is how we then created the housing cost calculator. It was designed to help limited resources go further. The pandemic is putting huge pressures on council finances, and we really need to talk about that. So the calculator is very much designed to really help people consider options and think about doing things differently, because certainly we know that housing 16,000 people in hotels just 60 days costs a lot of money. Was it money well spent? Of course it was. However, we also know that moving people a lot faster towards settled accommodation could certainly improve outcomes as well as save money. That's certainly what the evidence and our analysis suggests. We also know that rigorous evaluations of homelessness programs and policies are still very, very rare. So in response, just in this example of the types of things we are promoting, we've designed a trial that will evaluate the relative effectiveness and cost effectiveness of settled accommodation in preventing COVID-19 infection and reducing housing instability for people who have been sleeping rough during or immediately prior to the pandemic. This is just one of the trials we're running. We're also really interested in investing in empirical studies that will help reduce the cost of temporary accommodation, which is a huge issue, not just in England, but elsewhere in UK, in Scotland, and also in Wales in particular. And we have a series of experiments running with landlords that we hope to share with you this autumn. Also, very important during this period for us has been to work alongside our partners, so people like St. Martin's, for instance, to design bolt-on evaluations around things that we believe are really promising and we really need to learn from. So they have this really exciting personalized budget fund about to launch in the autumn, and designing evaluations that will help ensure that we learn from those pilots and we can help them scale. We also wanted to ensure that the research that's happening, that we learn from it. So we brought together a network of academics and people doing a lot of research from across the globe. And this is a partnership with MHLG, the ONS, PHE, and it has already over 60 thinkers, which is obviously really positive, and we really want to build on that learning. And again, we're reminded of what David said about the humility of coming together and having the courage and the wisdoms to say that we don't know which idea is better, but we will systematically going to try and find out. And certainly I completely agree with him that if we could get that and adopt those types of behaviors, we can really change not just the homelessness sector, but the world. The good news is that the evidence and gap maps, some of or most of you will know of them by now, that we launched when we launched the center. They are looking better. We're about to launch a new version in the next month or so, and it's looking a lot more populated. This is the old version, by the way. And we have more rigorous studies in the UK and elsewhere as well. So we really look forward to sharing those with you. The other thing we're looking forward to sharing with you that we hope will help with your work is the number of systematic reviews that build on the studies identified in the maps. We have rigorous synthesis coming out that will cover topics like access, discharge. So all of the things that we know at the moment is are causing problems. We hope that by investing in a more rigorous synthesis, because it's really important that if indeed policy and practice is listening to the evidence, that the evidence is also good quality, which is certainly not always the case. We hope that this type of work will help. So look out for those. We will also continue to encourage people to act on the evidence we already have, and there's plenty of fantastic evidence to build on in the UK for sure, in particular on the root causes of homelessness. So, for instance, we know that the people affected do not necessarily need emergency housing stays. So by relocating resources towards prevention, including interventions that help mainstream services respond more effectively to people at risk and more normalized housing environments, rather than thinking that people need supported housing, for instance, is an important thing to bear in mind, in particular looking at the latest trends in the stats. Obviously, and I know this is in the minds of many of you, we also know that to stop the flow of new people into homelessness, we will need to continue to address the larger housing affordability issues and to ensure that welfare support and wages are adequate. And of course, with some of the emergency measures coming to an end, all of those things are important to bear in mind, and we know that colleagues in government are certainly thinking about this very seriously. And let's also remember what Jeremy Swain from MHCLG, but obviously Thames Reach previously reminded us of, about the need to take more risks and obviously consider risks and risks that are based on the evidence. If there's, a time, this is it. To help, we launched our book. I have it here. If you haven't read it, please do. Again, it essentially explains why we are doing what we're doing. Why was the centre created? We will be here for as long as we're needed to help build a movement for evidence-led change in the field. And I suppose one of the ways in which we're going to build on the legacy of the festival is by launching a new campaign, End It With Evidence, in the autumn, that will essentially pick up the torch from the festival and continue to bring together those messages and the wonderful people already trying to do that and support them as much as possible. The other thing that's going to be happening this autumn is the launch of the Waterworks community. If you work in local government, please look out for the opportunities. We're looking for a number of new partners, up to 30 local authorities to join the community. Also later in the year and early in the new year, we will be opening some of that community to obviously other sectors as well. So if you're interested, or if you have any ideas as to how such an initiative could help you, please get in touch. And all of this, reminded me of one of the things that Jeff from the Harvard Kennedy School mentioned at the festival along the lines of, if you're not making progress, is because we haven't figured out what needs to change and measured our progress towards it. We've also not had effective collaborations across service providers. Getting people together to look at and assess data is key. So essentially this summarizes why we're doing this. We're doing it to help as much as we can. And of course, we know that people are already doing fantastic work. So it's very much about, tailoring this in such a way to just help understand what your challenges you're facing and see how a new set of eyes and bringing together the expertise from across all our networks can really help you in your local areas, get to the next level if we can. And just to start wrapping up, we know that ending homelessness for good was never going to be easy. I think it's so important to remind ourselves of that in the next phase of the pandemic, precisely because everyone, has been through a lot already. But remember that the challenges, especially post-COVID-19, lockdown are massive. But we remain convinced that with optimism, humility, determination, and better methods systematically applied, we can begin to redesign the system. So a response on the three fronts of data, evidence, and better capacity building will help ensure the best use of possible limited resources, and in places create opportunities to save money. So this is very much, about resilience, and precisely because of the phase of the pandemic, we're in, I felt it was really important to wrap up with this particular quote. We're all going to have periods of feeling quite run down, but if you can't fly, then run, and if you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward. And we need to keep moving forward, obviously on the back of evidence and data, and certainly at the center, we'll be here to do anything we can to help you. So before I end, of course, I want to finish by saying again, a massive thank you. Thank you for joining us and coming on this journey with us over these 5 weeks. And I also want to thank my wonderful team, and in particular, Illy, Jade, and Hannah. One thing we learned over the past 5 weeks is that you do not need physical closeness for social closeness. So thank you for being here, for being present, for the important work that you do, and certainly for always trying to do better. We really look forward to seeing you again, and thank you.